Welcome to Royal Haunts and Part 2 of the Plantagenets. On Henry I dying in 1307, while on his way to do battle with the Scots, his son Edward came to the throne. Edward II wasn't interested in taking Scotland, and the campaigns came to an end. Instead, Edward preferred spending time with favourites who he lavished with gifts, even if they were not his to give. Edward's favourite, Piers Gaveston, had been banished by his father, but when Edward became king he recalled him, much to the annoyance of the barons. There seems little doubt that Piers Gaveston and Edward, while still a prince, were lovers, openly flaunting their relationship. Once Edward was king, he must have thought he could fulfil his whims with no consequences, and bringing back the banished Gaveston bestowed on him the titles of Cornwall and making him regent of Ireland. When the king went to meet his future queen, Isabella of France, Gaveston remained in England as regent. He also strengthened his royal ties by marrying Margaret de Clare, a granddaughter of Edward I. When the barons had had enough, they forced Edward to banish Gaveston yet again, and when the king felt it was safe, Gaveston returned. But it was not safe, at least not for Piers Gaveston, and when the barons rose up yet again, Edward ordered his favourite to take refuge at Scarborough Castle. The building was far from the ruins that stand there today, and being heavily fortified had held off several sieges, but the barons had no intention of using their energies, and having time on their side, Gaveston was finally forced out by starvation. This time there was to be no exile, and Gaveston was executed by beheading. He is still said to haunt the ruins of what is left of the castle on a decaying coastline. Edward soon found new favourites in the Despencer family, and if Isabella disliked Piers Gaveston, she loathed Ely Despencer, the feeling being mutual. Isabella left for France, refusing to return while the Despensers remained at court. In the meantime she had formed an alliance with an exiled baron, Roger Mortimer, and they became lovers. With an army the couple returned to England, and Edward soon found his support dwindling. He attempted to escape, but was captured and forced to abdicate in favour of his 14-year-old son. Stripped of his kingdom, Edward found himself imprisoned at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where under appalling conditions he languished for 5 months. But Edward was too dangerous to keep alive, and was either starved to death or murdered. It is said the castle still rings with his screams of agonised pain. And so England went into regency, while Edward III came of age, with no one in any doubt that Roger Mortimer was the true power behind the throne. But Isabella and her lover didn't enjoy this power status for long. While Parliament was being held at Nottingham, the 18-year-old Edward took control in a coup, arresting the couple at Nottingham Castle. In a bid to escape, Roger Mortimer was captured in the caves below the castle. This is also part of the public house, cut into the rock below, where Roger Mortimer is now said to haunt, with staff at ye old trip to Jerusalem reporting many strange occurrences. Roger Mortimer was taken to London, and in nothing more than a mock trial was subsequently hanged. Isabella was seen to be just as guilty, and though Edward readily signed Mortimer's death warrant, Isabella was still his mother, and still had to be seen to be punished. Instead of death, she was imprisoned at Castle Rising in Norfolk, to remain there for the rest of her life. From castle records it seems she lived quite well, with ladies and barons to attend her, but being exiled from court and allowed to see no one but her retinue, it is said that in the latter part of her 20-year confinement she went mad. The screams that echo through the foundations of the castle are said to be Isabella. There are also suggestions that she pays haunting visits to Nottingham Castle, searching at the last place where she saw her lover alive. Edward III married Philippa of Anhalt, which was then in Flanders, but now Belgium. They had 13 children, with the male line later taking the country into civil war in a struggle for the crown. The eldest son, also named Edward, died before his father, but not before marrying Joan of Kent, also known as the Fair Maid of Kent. Edward and Joan married against his mother's wishes, as Joan was closely related, her father being the son of Edward I through his second wife Margaret of France. Joan had also been married twice, the second being bigamous, but it was a love match, and the couple had one surviving son. Edward and Joan spent some of their courting days at Hall Place in Bexley. Apart from the ghost of a female, Edward is said to be a regular visitor, wearing the black armour with which he is associated, and gaining him the nickname, sometime after his death, the Black Prince. Sightings of him are supposedly a warning of bad luck to owners of the hall, but for the most part the strains of music from the medieval period are put down to him. A stint of poltergeist activity that occurred at Woodstock Palace over 250 years after Edward's death is thought to have been the Black Prince, as he was born here. During the Royalist Roundhead Civil War, commissioners took up lodgings at Woodstock, but they were not allowed to enjoy the luxuries of the Royal Hunting Lodge, as beds moved as if by unseen hands, glass was thrown at them, and candles blew out with no apparent reason, leaving the men too frightened to stay longer, dubbing the activity as the work of the Woodstock Devil. Of course, once they left, the activity ceased. Unfortunately, the Roundheads returned to extract revenge and destroyed the house. In his later years, Edward III came under the influence of his mistress Alice Perrers, while allowing his son John of Gaunt to act as regent. Being one of the wealthiest men in the country, he was also one of the most powerful. Suffering a stroke, Edward died just over 1 year after his eldest son, and the crown passed to his 10-year-old grandson Richard, sending the country once again into regency. A commission of 12 men was appointed to oversee the running of the country, inheriting problems from Edward III's reign, mainly during John of Gaunt's regency. Needing money to finance the wars against France, a poll tax had been instigated, in which everyone over the age of 14 was expected to pay, only beggars being exempt, and at a shilling per head it left no sway for hardship. Sporadic riots broke out, but with the firm leadership of Wat Tyler, an angry mob descended on London. Shops were set ablaze, along with the Savoy Palace, home of John of Gaunt. It was the 14-year-old king who rode out to face a crowd of some 60,000 protesters. His bravery and his acceptance of their demands, along with pardons for the rebels, eased tensions, and the people dispersed, returning to their home counties. It left a shattered London with over 150 dead, including Wat Tyler and Simon of Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been seized and beheaded. With battles against the French and wars with Scotland, 12 years into the regency, 22-year-old Richard summoned the Great Council, and declaring himself of age, told them he was taking control of his own house. With internal plots to depose Richard, he became somewhat paranoid, if not something of a despot. No one was safe, as his uncle, Thomas, the Duke of Gloucester, was arrested and taken to Calais, where he was murdered, his death being put down to the orders of Richard. On the other hand, his uncle John of Gaunt remained loyal to the king, even though his eldest son and heir was banished for a period of 10 years. However, when John of Gaunt died, expecting to receive his inheritance, Henry Bolingbroke found his father's lands and wealth being made forfeit to the crown, with Richard doling them out to favourites. This was Richard's downfall, as Henry, with a force of 300 men, landed in Yorkshire, gathering so much support that Richard had little option but to accept the terms. Having married twice with no children, Richard was forced to abdicate. Parliament deposed him and declared Henry the new king, bringing the house of Plantagenet to an end and forging a new dynasty with the Lancastrians. Richard was imprisoned at Pontefract Castle, where after 5 months he was most certainly murdered, either by starvation or on the sword. It was difficult for people to accept Richard's death, and even though Henry had Richard's body put on display, rumours persisted that the king was still alive. Pontefract Castle was later destroyed by the Roundheads during the Civil War, leading the place to where the last Plantagenet king died to fall to the ruin of today.